3.46 million. Just let that number sink in for a second. We're talking about the millions of tons of municipal solid waste, or MSW, that gets exported from Ontario, Canada, straight into the United States every single year. And right now, this massive, completely hidden logistical flow is sitting right at the absolute center of a multi-billion-dollar geopolitical standoff.
Welcome to our studio video overview. Today, we're going to completely unpack how the escalating 2025 and 2026 US-Canada trade war is literally weaponizing a highly integrated, yet usually invisible, cross-border infrastructure. Yep, we're talking about our garbage. Okay, let's dive into this. We'll start by looking at the 2026 trade war, then examine the transboundary waste corridor, unpack the USMCA commodity loophole, check out Ontario's domestic landfill crisis, and finally, wrap up with the strict USMCA compliance rules you need to know. All right, kicking things off with Section 1, the 2026 trade war.
The timeline of this tit-for-tat dispute has honestly been relentless, especially when you look at the latest year-to-date reporting. In February 2025, President Trump in Washington enacted a 25% near-universal tariff on Canadian goods. Then, by March, Ontario Premier Doug Ford retaliated with a 25% electricity surcharge on exports heading to U.S. border states. Fast-forwarding a whole year to February 2026, and the U.S. Supreme Court strikes down those initial tariffs in their Learning Resources ruling. That prompted the Washington administration to immediately pivot over to Section 122 global tariffs. It's been a dizzyingly rapid trade dispute, and it's fundamentally shaking up the very foundation of North American commerce.
Moving right along to Section 2, the transboundary waste corridor.
Now, what's really interesting here is that while Ontario manages about 73% of its waste locally, a massive 27% is exported directly to the U.S., and once that trash crosses the border, it makes up over 14.35% of all the MSW disposal shipped across the border to Michigan landfills from Ontario, Canada. To put that into perspective, that's 3.46 million tons, highlighting an incredible and honestly increasingly risky logistical dependency.
So you might be wondering, why go through the hassle of shipping municipal solid waste across international borders in the first place? Well, it all comes down to extreme economic arbitrage. The math is pretty stark. Right now, Michigan charges an incredibly cheap state tipping fee of just 36 cents per ton. Compare that to Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer's proposed fee of $5 per ton. That massive price hike is specifically designed to deter these exact Canadian imports and fund local environmental cleanups. But for the time being, that 36-cent price tag makes exporting trash highly lucrative for Ontario haulers.
Which brings us to Section 3, the USMCA commodity loophole.
With state governors actively wanting to deter foreign trash, it begs a very logical question. Why can't Michigan just, legally ban it? Well, it turns out, under the USMCA and NAFTA before it, municipal solid waste is legally classified as a manufactured commodity. Because it's generated and collected within North America, it gets preferential duty-free status. It is a fascinating legal quirk where garbage is actually afforded the exact same trade protections as auto parts or agricultural goods, keeping that border completely wide open.
Furthermore, the Dormant Commerce Clause in the U.S. Constitution strictly forbids individual states from charging international or out-of-state waste haulers higher fees than domestic municipal users. That essentially means any unilateral state ban violates federal commerce laws. So if you really wanted to restrict this transboundary flow, it absolutely couldn't happen at the state level. It would require a massive federal tariff maneuver directly out of Washington.
Let's shift our focus up north for Section 4, Ontario's domestic landfill crisis. And this brilliantly illustrates the real-world impact. The constant threat of border closures and tariffs is causing some severe domestic fallout on the Canadian side. Under normal operations, Ontario's currently approved landfill capacity will be completely exhausted by 2037. But in a closed border scenario, like if the U.S. suddenly halts that exported waste, the timeline completely collapses. Ontario runs out of space by 2034. Guys, that is literally less than a decade away.
Because of this looming threat, the Ford government in Ontario is taking some pretty drastic measures. They're currently fast-tracking domestic waste expansions, most notably the Dresden landfill site by York and One. They are controversially bypassing standard environmental assessments, explicitly citing the urgent threat of U.S. tariffs impacting the waste sector. This allows them to override local municipal opposition and quickly expand domestic capacity.
But there are also some major upstream mitigation efforts underway. Ontario is transitioning to a 100% extended producer responsibility, or EPR, model by January 1, 2026. Basically, this shifts the financial cost of recycling away from taxpayers and puts it directly onto the private companies who actually make the packaging. It's an aggressive attempt to increase recycling rates at the source and reduce that desperate reliance on limited landfill space.
Finally, we arrive at Section 5, strict USMCA compliance rules.
So what does this all mean for the businesses actually moving the goods? Well, to claim that duty-free status, haulers need a verifiable certificate of origin at the exact moment of entry. And for things like 5-year record retention and internal audits, relying on paper is just no longer viable. Modern operations absolutely require a strict 905 Wood digital refinery workflow with an immediate UI/UX output straight to clean PDF documentation. Missing even one of these digital verification steps triggers denied entry, massive back duty assessments, and some severe penalties.
So the crucial point here is that the failure risks and rewards are just massive. First off, missing documentation at entry means you end up paying full tariffs unnecessarily, simply because you couldn't prove your waste's origin when customs ask. Second, applying incorrect country of origin determinations can unknowingly disqualify your shipments entirely. In such a high-stakes trade environment, having those robust digital refinery application workflows in place is really the only way to protect your margins.
And we definitely can't forget about the financial assurance realities. Under Article 9 of the bilateral transboundary agreements, Ontario transportation insurance requirements dictate that waste shipments must be covered by comprehensive insurance. This ensures that any third-party damages occurring during loading, transit, and unloading are fully 100% financially guaranteed. It is a strict, vital layer of compliance that's legally required to move hazardous or municipal waste across this international border.
Which brings us to our final thought for this studio video overview. As the July 2026 USMCA joint review looms on the horizon, will North America's highly integrated waste network actually survive this trade war? The stakes are quite literally in the billions. Domestic infrastructure is being pushed to the absolute brink, and the trilateral negotiations are really just getting started. Thank you so much for joining me for this analysis, and definitely keep your eyes on that border.